Hello and welcome to our webinar. My name is Jake Alger and I'm going to be your moderator today. So we're going to explore opportunities, challenges, and solutions surrounding 5G and IoT connectivity and talk about security and management as well. Our speaker today is Roger Billings, a global solutions architect at Cradlepoint. Before we start, I want to cover a couple of quick housekeeping items. First, the phone lines of all attendees are muted, so if you have any questions, please use that questions tab that you see in the platform. We're going to address many of your questions in a live Q&A session at the end of the webinar. And also look for several helpful pieces of content in the attachments tab on your screen, including the slides from today's presentation, which I'm going to upload immediately after the presentation. So there's several things, a couple of reports, case studies, videos, things like that in the attachments that we think you will find helpful. With that, I'm going to turn things over to Roger Billings.
Thanks, Jake. Appreciate it. So probably a lot of you already know about Cradlepoint, but a quick overview of who we are and what we do. We are in 75% of the top worldwide retailers. We got our start about 10 years ago, a little over 10 years ago, all right, 12 years ago now. In 2006, and quickly became the de facto standard for failover in the PCI business in terms of getting retailers to have that. We're in the top 50% of the Fortune 100 and 40% of the Fortune 1000. We have over 23,000 customers across 50 countries around the globe. And from an IoT perspective, we're in 100% in the top 25 U.S. cities here. So, and we're obviously with a worldwide leader in 4G LTE enterprise WAN networking. So let's talk a little about what IoT and 5G. We're going to break this presentation into sort of two distinct sections. One's going to be focused on 5G, which will start first, and then the second one will be IoT. And I'll link the two together as to where we are going as a company and how 5G and IoT fit together. But IoT, from an enterprise perspective, is how do enterprises deploy and manage thousands and hundreds of IoT devices around the world, and what can we do to improve the security? Security is going to be a main focus of what we're talking about today. And from the 5G perspective, you know, questions such as when will it arrive, and how much better will it be than 4G, and what are the potential impacts for business? We're building use cases with several of our partners. Those are our global operators, as well as some of the infrastructure players that actually create the 5G infrastructure for our global operators. So it's an exciting time to be part of this business. But let's talk a little bit about what the pathway from 4G to 5G looks like. In the past, back when 4G was launched about 7.5 years ago, enterprise were pretty wary of using wireless or cellular as a transport, and slowly but surely trust began to grow as we realized it was reliable, it was very flexible, and it provided a lot of opportunities. And still the main thing that probably causes a little bit of heartburn is the overage charges. So the cost is probably the main thing that is preventing a wholesale adoption of 4G as a primary transport. But slowly but surely plans are changing, and we'll talk a little bit about that. We don't have any data today as to what 5G will and 4G future plans will be, because the global operators, that's the last thing they set before they start rolling out service. But 5G will bring in 4 different areas of technological advancements. New spectrum. So the operators today are currently refarming their 2G and 3G spectrums. They're using those pieces of bandwidth up in the air to be able to say, we're going to use this for 5G and give us a lot more bandwidth and so forth. We're also using a little bit of unlicensed and what we call lightly licensed spectrum. So they're using Wi-Fi frequencies in what they call LAA, or license-assisted access. You connect on a licensed band, and when they need more bandwidth, they will do that. Use some of the 5 gigahertz spectrum to be able to add a little bit more upload bandwidth. There's another piece of bandwidth in the 3.5 gigahertz range called CBRS, and it stands for Citizens Band Radio Service. Not like the Citizens Band we had in the 70s, but a similar type of thing in that it's lightly licensed. Some of that spectrum is being used for the defense industries today, and in those cases you can't use it, but they'll be licensing it in sort of a, well, I say lightly licensed, meaning they'll have it by per county or some other thing where you'll have primary access users, and then when that spectrum's not being used, because you can sort of test it out first, then the average Joe will be able to use that spectrum as they need to, and it's an unlicensed frequency. You know, a lot of this comes down to another piece of bandwidth which we've never used before, which is above 6 gigahertz. We divide the spectrum into sort of two different distinct areas. Below 6 gigahertz is what we've been traditionally using today, which includes everything all the way up to obviously the 5 gigahertz with Wi-Fi, and above 6 gigahertz in millimeter wave. For those of you who've been to an airport, you will recognize the millimeter wave in that every time you walk through and put your hands above your head and they do a quick scan of you, that's millimeter wave technology. It penetrates your clothing, but it doesn't go much further than that. So it's very low penetration, but very high capacity, short distance. And so that's an area that a lot of the operators are looking today for what they call fixed wireless access. From the other side of the spectrum, the operators are looking at more streams per radio in terms of more bandwidth using what they call massive MIMO, or multiple input, multiple output. And secondarily to that, they're using more information per wavelength. So there's a thing called QAM, which is quadrature amplitude modulation. Today we're currently using 64 QAM, and they're going to be going up to 256. So in the same wavelength, or the same waveform, you get 256 pieces of information versus 64. So much better effective use of the spectrum. And the operators are also building out pockets of denser cells. So you'll see a lot of building going on, multiple billions of dollars by all the major carriers in terms of putting a lot more small cells in, because this new spectrum that's in the high frequency range doesn't travel very far. And they're also adding more bandwidth. So one of the operators bought enough fiber to be able to go from here to Mars and back. It's an interesting thing that they're putting there. So they'll be deploying a lot more cell sites and much more denser. The other thing that 5G has that's really interesting is its seamless integration with 4G. So 4G is not going away. As you travel from an urban area or an area where 5G is and go out into the country, you'll still be using the same sort of back-in type of system, but your LTE will take over when the 5G goes down. Now, all this is a little bit in the future, but that's what the standards predict, and that's what we'll be doing and going forward. So one of the other things that 5G does, it erases some of the limitations we have for 4G. 4G was great. It was designed for what we did 7 or 8 years ago, which was a lot of emails and things like that. But the consumers and the customers are now looking to do more real-time video. They're looking to add other applications, which we'll talk about in the future, in future slides. You know, the outcome for users and businesses is going to have a 10x decrease in latency. So latency as low as 1 millisecond. Now that's to the tower and to the radio network. You know, obviously the speed of light hasn't changed since they're deploying 5G. So if you're going from one side of the country to the other, there's still going to be a little bit of latency there. But with the fiber that the operators are putting in the ground, they will decrease that, and it'll be a much quicker experience, which allows us to do a lot more things that we never were able to do in the past. The other side of the coin is 10x experienced throughput, being able to have multi-gigabits peak rate, anywhere between 200 and 500 to above 1 gig in terms of the amount of bandwidth that will be available in the 5G area. For the actual operators that are out there, they'll have a lot more connection density, 10 times more, which enables them to do things for low power IoT devices, being able to put sensors in the ground, on light poles, having a lot more devices connected to the network, a lot more traffic capacity. And as we talked about the QAM and the 256 and even higher as we go forward, being able to have more spectrum efficiency. So when you go to a football game with 100,000 of your closest friends, you'll be able to get a much better signal on a 5G type network than you would with a 4G, because there'll be a lot more density, efficiency, and capacity there. So it's going to be very exciting times as we go forward in this role here. Oops, sorry, that went too far. So why 5G matters? So wireless can be a sole broadband source in terms of a fixed wireless area. Low latency, as we talked about earlier, can make low latency applications practical. And here's some pictures of what, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in the future, but things like augmented reality. And obviously with IoT, that we'll talk about a little bit later, a lower power consumption. So you could have a sensor on every cow, or here we are in Idaho, you could have a sensor on every potato. So it'll be interesting times as to why 5G matters and what we can do with this new technology. Now, I apologize for this slide. There was a slight hiccup in the build for this. So 2G is actually supposed to end in 2017, and it's a lot of network providers have already closed that out. 3G is going to be sunsetted from a aspect. So if you think about EVDO, both Sprint and Verizon have said they are canceling their 3G networks by 2020. So at the end of 2019, it'll be turned off. So if you buy Cradlepoint products today, you'll notice that all the current new modems don't support EVDO because the operator said we're sunsetting that. We're going to use that spectrum for 5G. As we see here, 4G goes from it should go from like 2018 and 2017 all the way to 2030. Several of the operators have said that they're going to have at least until 2030 because it's part of the standard. These 4G, 3G, 2G things happen about every 10 years. Obviously, there's a 6G coming out probably in 2030. By then, we'll know what that is going to look like, but we're not even going to talk about that today. 5G fixed wireless, starting about 2018, late 2018, early 2019 is where that band should be starting from a 5G fixed perspective. And the 5G full feature goes from 2020 onwards. In terms of that's where the standards are in the deployments. Again, sorry about the build there. But let's talk about 5G in the enterprise. Yeah, the first thing that I wouldn't say is it's a very big game changer is having fixed sites of cutting the wires. Retail stores and offices rely less and less on wired lines because they need to move things around. 4G LTEs enable day one connectivity, so if you think about how we provide connectivity to things like Halloween stores and other pop-up stores, that's happened in today's market on 4G. Now with 5G, you'll get a good viable replacement for fiber because you'll be able to use a very high-speed, low-latency bandwidth to your site, and it's just like 4G in that you plug a SIM into a device and take it from there, and you're up and running. The pricing is going to be expected. Again, we can't predict what the operators will do, but it'll become more of an all-you-can-eat type thing, so no overages. It looks like you might be able to just buy it on an ability to say, I want to have a gig service, I want to have a 500 meg service or a 300 meg service, and you get that type of service offered to you from a speed perspective. And it'll act as a primary WAN with 4G LTE as a failover so that when 5G goes down, because some of this millimeter wave spectrum is a little bit finicky and brittle, if let's say a bus goes between you and your antenna, you're going to have a little bit of interruption in coverage. So when we're looking at deploying some of this fixed wireless, most likely it's going to be something that has to be next to a window or on a roof or something along those lines. Now, we're working on improving that, but a lot of the laws of physics are in play here, so we can't do much about that. But 5G will definitely open doors for better speeds and lower latency so we can add a lot more different types of applications. And some of those applications are things like remote SMEs or subject matter experts. Today we have kiosks, so when we put the kiosk in, we basically have a retail store without any employees. And as we go forward, we're going to add that employee back into the kiosk with a remote subject matter expert. Things like telemedicine, which I'll talk about a little bit in the IoT section here. And tomorrow, we'll look at, with 5G, it'll expand what can be done remotely. So having a haptic type glove where a patient puts on a little glove and the doctor can do things such as palpitations of where they need to have something going. That is an industry that's very exciting because as we get older, or as our population gets older and more complex, they're going to have a lot more docs answering calls and being able to do what I call the Uberization of doctors, be able to go out and have a doctor at any time, anywhere, and the doc can be doing his daytime practice and then sign in at night and offer other services as they need to. And we can do this across, virtually every industry. Having a smart hands person being able to be centrally located as opposed to having somebody smart on every site where you have a technological challenge. Think of things like an airport where you might have somebody wearing a bit of a glasses type environment, being able to repair a jet while it's at the airport as opposed to shipping it somewhere else, or having somebody fly in to fix that technology. So again, remote SMEs are a good use for 5G type technology. Another one is, multi-user ultra-high-def video conferencing. I think those of us who have the LAN side of things, you can definitely have a big screen TV, and you can do a lot of that with a wired connection. We haven't been able to get to that point today on today's 4G network. It works, but it's not really ideal. Those of you who've ever had a video conference or a Skype call know sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not. With 5G, we'll be able to transform that into for a multi-user, ultra-high def, so you actually, just like being there in your home or at the office or on the road or from your cell phone, and being able to have video conferencing anywhere you want it with a 5G type connection. Another one's quite interesting is something called robotics. So right now, the robotics industry in manufacturing, they use a lot of wires, and if they ever have to make a change on the floor, it takes a lot of work to be able to do that. And as the robots are getting smarter and faster, they can't be tapped to their full potential because the human is still in the loop. So the idea here is that you would have sort of a private 5G type network on the factory floor with the robots, and you'd have humans wearing some sort of sensor, and as the human gets closer to the factory floor, the machines could start slowing down, and if the user is not smart enough to get out of the way, the machine can actually stop immediately so that you're able to save lives and not have people get hurt on a factory floor while getting higher productivity from the robots because they can move much faster. Also, with a wireless connection, you don't have to have those wires anymore, so changes to the factory floor can be made almost instantly. On the other side of the coin is a lot of these things are controlled from a data center on site, and that isn't very efficient. So being able to use a 5G connection back to a centrally located data center and have that type of low latency control allows them to centralize their data centers and their infrastructure supporting the robots and take it from there. Again, it's sort of an IoT type application if you think of a robot as an IoT type device, but it's going to be really exciting times when it comes to robotics. Augmented and virtual reality. Now we start talking about the really cool stuff. It'll be a game changer for augmented reality. Things like public safety. Officers being able to wear a helmet, an AR helmet, and see what's going on and look around and have automated facial recognition. So when they're looking at somebody, they can see who the perpetrator is in the crowd and can be pointed out to them. In fire safety, they'll have the plans laid out straight on the helmet so that they can actually see and be kept track of where the firemen are. In retail, being able to shop from anywhere, being able to try on clothes and have augmented reality so you can be in the comfort of your own home and look through a pair of glasses or some sort of other video screen and say, oh, I want that in pink, or I want that in blue, and what does it look like, and how different is it? Being able to visualize the items in different environments. And, obviously in store, being able to have something like this where they can actually point out things. Those of you who've seen Minority Report, that's sort of a augmented reality taken to another level. But we have the technology to be able to do that. Public transportation, using augmented reality to find a way around the city is going to be a very cool thing. Every bus stop, you'll have a map of where the bus is and where everything is, and being able to do waypoints and guiding and show arrows on the street saying, all right, turn left up here. Very cool stuff. And that's all enabled by having high bandwidth and low latency. Because augmented reality really needs to have low latency, because if the user has any lag in what they're doing, they get dizzy and start getting sick. And in video surveillance, so the last piece here, again, another IoT type technology. Today they store and record, and then they come and pull it up. They can do real time in some situations, but the bandwidth and having LTE connections is really hard for them to do that. And so being able to have that in every industry, footage is stored and retrieved or offloaded via Wi-Fi or whatever it is, tomorrow they'll be able to do real-time high-def video monitoring and add onto that sort of the AR-type connected helmet so that the officer can see what some of the other video cameras are showing so they can know what's coming around the corner. Very interesting. So let's change gears a little bit and look at IoT for the enterprise. So, all right, this is going 2 slides for me. Sorry about that. IoT in enterprise is everywhere and anywhere. So if we look at it, there's sensors, there's the ability to see video cameras, being able to control HVAC systems, having kiosks, which is sort of an IoT type application, parking meters, healthcare, connected scales. And so everywhere you look, we're having a lot more devices being able to connect on the network. And how do we secure that? That's going to be the main thing that's going to be the challenge. Is these devices are small, but they don't have a lot of smarts in them. So being able to secure that, you have to put something outside of that to aggregate and add the layer of security, and Cradlepoint is solving those challenges today. So when we talk about IoT reports and the state of IoT, 69% of enterprises are already embracing or getting ready to embrace IoT today. People know it. It's probably out there and they're not even thinking about it. Anybody goes into a smart building, IoT is everywhere in terms of being able to control the HVAC, being able to control the lights, smart lighting. We're seeing a lot of things where lights come on and go off and are controlled by key cards or whatever, all integrated together. So again, needs to be secure, needs to be separate on the network or something like that. So on the security side, this is where, as we've talked about, attack surface is really expanding. So many more devices are out there, and each one has a sort of could have a fault in it that allows you to hop on one device and then go somewhere else. For those of you familiar with the Target breach that was actually occurred through the HVAC system. And Target got blamed for that, but it wasn't actually Target that had the problem, it was the HVAC system company. Obviously Target had a problem with it because they had their PCI transactions stolen. 25 billion IoT devices, 75% mobile workforce, and it takes almost 256 days to identify attacks that are going on. Now, some of you might have heard about the recent one today where a casino thought it was really cool and they added a brand new fish tank to their casino, and they put in this nice heater into the fish tank to heat it up, and it was internet connected, and they just plugged it straight into the network on the Wi-Fi. Well, they didn't change the passwords, they didn't change a lot of things. People were able to break into that and steal the high roller lists from that casino because nobody was able to secure that device. Again, security is the biggest challenge here. 41% of the survey people here say that the greatest challenges are security and costs associated with that. Reliable connectivity, internal expertise, and legacy network infrastructure. We're upgrading our systems. We're upgrading our network so we can support the number of IoT devices out there, but we have to definitely figure out how we're going to secure them. Seeing IoT security in the news. Mirai virus turns the Linux devices into bots. Obviously, if you have a bunch of IoT devices and you turn them into a botnet, now you can do a distributed denial of service attack against somebody and bring that type of network down. BrickerBot, Reaper, WannaCry, all these things are out there in the wild and have been affecting people all over the place. The BrickerBot is more malicious because it wipes the device itself. Then we talk about things such as Bluetooth 5. How is that going to be secured? And the rogue IoT devices. How do you prevent somebody bringing an IoT device into your network and being able to use it to penetrate your network? And of course, the lack of standards that we talked about earlier in manufacturing, communication protocols, and power of the device is all causing, a little number of challenges for IoT security. And when we talk about the underlying infrastructure, IP was definitely built for communication. So back when it was designed by the DoD to allow a network to stay up during a nuclear attack, it was designed to be very easily, very flexible, and have the ability to always stay up. TCP/IP has been the pervasive transport protocol for many decades, but it's not really been designed for the IoT network. So we're looking at things such as a software-defined perimeter technology, which is a private overlay network to connect these devices and keep them off the network so that they can't be hacked and they can't be touched. I think I had a presentation a little over a year ago when we had the original NetCloud perimeter demo with our CFO, and we built a network in 5 minutes or less, and she's a non-technical user and was able to do that very easily, and it was a very, very cool thing. And I offered up the IoT device to the world and said, if anybody can break this, I'll give them $100 right then. Obviously they couldn't because it's not on the network, it's totally hidden. So, why do we use NetCloud Perimeter, and how does it do easy IoT isolation? Well, you might start out with a manufacturing site, and then you add a cloud gateway or something along those lines, and you want to be able to segment that off. And as we add more and more devices, such as a mobile site, you have these type of things that need to be easily isolated from each other or connected to each other over the internet. As we add devices to this, such as a mobile professional or a surveillance camera or a surveillance server or kiosks or apps in the public cloud, you have one network but multiple segments, because some things connect to each other, some things connect to the cloud, some things connect to mobile apps, and so we can create multiple networks on the same physical network, and none of them can be traced from anybody else. Very simple to deploy, as we talked about earlier. It's point and click, all sort of 5 minutes or less. And everything is sent to the cloud and is delivered securely. So I can create this using NetCloud Manager, and a certain part of that, it makes it easy to have a wizard-like interface to create a network very easily. We also apply policies to that from microsegmentation. So device A cannot talk to device B, but they can both talk to cloud server Z. Very easy to do that. And because it's an overlay network, we are tied to cloaking the IP addresses, which minimizes the need for crosstalk. Talk about wellheads and being able to have those sensors out there and putting a Cradlepoint device with LTE on there to secure those wellheads. You don't ever want to see a wellhead talking to another wellhead. This is not something that needs to be done. The wellhead's going to talk to the server back in the data center or in the cloud, and that's the only thing that they want it to do. So we can definitely take it from there. Having a private IP space hides the connections from the internet. I'm using real IP addresses that are on the wild network, but we have bought them here at Cradlepoint, and they are not found anywhere in the world. And we do that because we, A, don't want to have any confliction when we go to Starbucks and have to use that IP address. If we used one of the 10 nets or 192 or 168, something along those lines, 168.72, we don't want to have that confliction from an IP area. So hosts talk directly to each other without using publicly addressable IPs. And the public internet doesn't even know the connections exist because they're all done over an SSL, AES 256-bit encryption, TLS connection. Connections can't be attacked or denial of service, and they can't be compromised because you can't see them. The underlying address could be compromised, but if you put the system correctly in place, you wouldn't have that access to those individual devices out there. Now, adding access control for additional security, we talked about this a little bit earlier, It comes down from invitation first and then connection second. If we think about it, you go into a public Wi-Fi, what's the first thing you do? You look at the public Wi-Fi, you get on the network, and then you have to fill out a form or something like that that says I'm who I am and get on the network. Now, if you go plug into something in an Ethernet connection, you're on the network. There's not a lot of control. Some people do 802.1x, and to be able to do that type of certificate-based authentication, but being able to say, I'm going to get on the network, but now if I really want to connect to my devices, I have to now sign in and be invited to be able to get onto the private overlay network. I'm on the underlay network, which is any connection. It could be Starbucks, it could be your office network, it could be anything, but I need to be pre-authenticated to the network. Again, encrypted using AES 256-bit encryption, and it gives a high level of security regardless of location. I can even secure things for devices out there that they can't get to the internet or they can't run certain applications. If I ever see a wellhead doing, YouTube, I know something's gone wrong. Somebody's taken over that network. So being able to block that type of traffic in case somebody unplugs something and plugs another device in allows me to say, that's really cool, but you can't get anywhere from here because you are not the right device. I can limit it down to MAC address. I can limit it down to device type, limit it down to a different type of users being on the network. Bob's computer at the office can get on the network, but Bob's private laptop can't. So being able to have that level of granularity is very critical of how we do things going forward. Now let's talk about WAN segmentation within an enterprise. So I might have a digital sign-in, I might have a video surveillance unit, or I might have a kiosk all running on different Cradlepoint routers. And as we expand this out, I would have different networks talking to different devices, all at the same network or the same physical WAN network, but all going to different spaces. So I might have a remote monitoring of my kiosk WAN segment. So it isolates them against lateral movement. I can't move from one to the other. I can't use some of the challenges that we have, even if somebody were to take over the connection somehow. I couldn't go from the video surveillance network or the kiosk WAN segment and get onto something else because I'm just not allowed to do that from my station. And having a digital signage thing, that may go to an application in a public cloud. So it could be going to a data center, one instance in the data center, another instance in the data center. It allows me to have one overlay network with multiple segments or multiple overlay networks, depending on how I want to have that, all on the same underlay network that we put in out there. We talk about isolated service. This is a use case that applies in both 5G and 4G. 5G is going to give us, we talked about the remote SME. This is what this patient and clinician at a remote clinic being able to talk to a doctor somewhere else. Using LTE and NCP or NetCloud perimeter in combination gives it physical and logical isolation. Means the doctor doesn't have to worry about any HIPAA compliancy because the doctor is only talking point to point with that device that's out there on the network. I have a PC with a battery powered system. I might have a video conference unit and telemedicine software. A general examination camera so I can see what's happening there, as well as obviously the video conference. I might have an ECG or electrocardiogram connected to this. All of this is a single point-to-point connection with digital scopes going from this device to the doctor and nothing else. Again, all of this is managed using NetCloud Manager to be able to handle that, so we can do this management centrally. Again, here's what it looks like from an overlay network perspective. This cart, or this medical cart with these 5 different things attached to it, only talks to the doctor. The doc could be anywhere in the world. They could be on the golf course. They could be in their office. It doesn't matter. Again, this is sort of the Uberization of doctors, where that doctor wants to take this call after hours, and he has a very secure connection and takes it from there. A good example and use case, which is on our website, is the Visio Health. This is the exact same scenario here. Visio Health has one engineer who coined the term cart area network, because each device lives beyond the router with its own IP and persistent address, and all delivered through NetCloud. So the challenge is where they needed to have reliable, high-quality video and audio anywhere, we had to protect the patient data, had to have expensive network architecture to do this in a traditional network, and it's a complex deployment and very labor-intensive. The outcome for this was very easy to do because we used NetCloud Perimeter, used perimeter-based IOC security, and with the overlay network, it was created in very few minutes. Again, able to monitor that and remotely manage that through the cloud was a big piece of this, so that one area could control 50 to 100 to however many carts they might have out there. We look about NCP for remote monitoring and management. Again, same type of thing. IoT-specific wireless going through a Cradlepoint router with an IoT segment, adding to any router and getting to a public cloud. You might have the same type of thing where we have a surveillance application running on a Windows server, and the client actually runs on the Windows server as opposed to on the Cradlepoint router, being able to view that surveillance from anywhere, anytime. And the nice thing about the Cradlepoint NetCloud Perimeter is it can run on a variety of platforms. It can run on the Cradlepoint router, obviously, runs on the Windows systems, runs on Macs, runs on iOS, runs on Android, Linux, and in the cloud, you might have a public or a private data center running Windows, or you might have it running in a Docker container. So all the applications in the Docker container can be using NetCloud Perimeter and have several subnets being able to handle that all very easily. JBT Aerotech is another use case that you'll find on our website that talks about how they were able to reduce the amount of hardware and have components in the middle. There's actually a very good video that one of our engineers put together that talks about exactly what JBT did. They had to bring your own network to an airport. JBT manages the jet bridges that are out there. And basically, they are on the airport, but they couldn't use the airport's system, so they had to use LTE to connect to it, but they wanted to have the ability to have multiple segments or multiple micro-segments on those networks. Again, like the others, real-time monitoring management, easily cost savings, easily deployed, and it's basically a physically and logically isolated network. Another use case that we had out there is DSC Dredge. So they are a dredging company that actually goes all around the world, and being able to monitor and manage the dredges from the U.S. in one centralized location makes it very easy for them to handle this type of stuff. They need to report back to their clients what's going on. They could use VPN, but it's complex, and especially for some very remote locations. And the IP address, being able to get a static IP address or something like that in remote locations was very challenging for them. So obviously with deploying NetCloud Perimeter, they were able to have a very good customer satisfaction. They saved travel costs. They had private IP addressing and a constant IP addressing, and it was easy to deploy and maintain. Parallel networks is another concept that Cradlepoint's been very successful at. If you were to go into a Walmart today, you would probably see anywhere between 5 and 20 different Cradlepoint devices handling various aspects of things within the Cradlepoint or within the Walmart network. Not necessarily connected to Walmart, because Walmart doesn't want you on their network. They might have something that would be for the hunting and fishing license. If during tax season from sort of January to April into May, you'll see Jackson Hewitt there. You might go do a transaction at Redbox or have a rug doctor or get some coins cashed in at a Coinstar. Those are all devices that run Cradlepoints today. Now, it's physically separated into security zones. It's air-gapped and allows us to protect the sensitive data, and it's very plug-and-play.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Roger. We have time for questions. So before we get to the questions, we'll just get there in a minute or two. I'm going to give everybody a chance to enter more questions in if you still have some. And while we're doing that, I want to let everybody know again about all the attachments that we have in there. There's some a 5G report that just came out that we just published, a state of IT report which Roger referenced earlier. We have several blog posts, including a couple that Roger himself wrote. and a video that's pretty interesting. It shows a demo of how to create a network in NetCloud Perimeter in just a few minutes. It's very informative. I think it kind of helps people visualize how simple that process really is. One question here, Roger, that we have, and you'll see it up there, what are the security considerations of 5G? In addition to wireless, will this new ability to send, receive require new endpoint devices to support 5G?
Thanks for that. That's a good question. So the security considerations are similar to what you had in 4G. Now, it's new technology. It's still an encrypted signal going from the radio tower to the end device. That's all pretty good. But in addition to wireless, so we think the security is going to be good. Although security challenges, one way to look at this question would be, how do I do my security for my enterprise now? And the question there would be, if everything goes back to the data center to be able to go through the series of firewalls and other areas where you explode malware and things like that, you're going to add a lot of latency. So that you have to look with 5G when having a low latency type network, do I really want to do that? Or do I need to look at different ways of deploying my security mechanism, either in the cloud or closer to the edge, so I lower that latency? Because it doesn't do me any good to say, all right, I've got a 10 millisecond connection to my application, but oh, by the way, I've got to go all the way across the country. That adds another 30 to 40 milliseconds to go out to my application. And the other side of that is, will this new ability to send and receive require new endpoint devices that supports 5G? There will definitely be new radios that are going to be out there, but what we're seeing today is devices, such as all Cradlepoint devices that have an Ethernet connection, will be able to handle a 5G type scenario. That brings up another point as to what is going to be the weakest link. So we're looking at providing higher than 1 gig or 1 gig type services, being able to provide these high speeds. It doesn't do any good to have a router that can only support 10 to 15 megabits through it, and we need to change that. So that's why Cradlepoint is designing new pieces of hardware that are able to support 1 gig and more. One of the questions that was interesting here says, I always knew Skynet was coming, whether or not we wanted it, and I will bow down to our robot overloads. Funny stuff, whoever has said that. Another one was, is this AWS Cloud? So we use AWS, and for NetCloud Perimeter, other data centers scattered across the world. So that is a very interesting question. AWS is what we use for our control plane, and we use that across the globe. But we use multiple data centers, and usually you're within a few milliseconds of the data center to handle this. Please provide an overview of why the Cradlepoint routers are superior in the cellular modem space compared to USB-style USB cellular modems, and expand on devices we buy today and their ability to support 5G. I think I talked a little bit about that. Having a high-speed Ethernet connection is going to be critical, and Cradlepoint's done this for a while. It's good that somebody brought up the USP side of things. When we first started with 4G LTE, there wasn't a modem out there. We used USB modems in our old devices, and we learned a lot about the technology. What we found going forward is, obviously, we had to have our own modem type connection, and so we used module providers, or in one case, we actually built a modem from scratch for not LTE, but for a different type of technology, and we learned a lot. I think one of the guys here coined the term, and I apologize in advance, we make modems suck less, because we really did a lot of things to be able to enable modem connectivity. USB modems are great, but they're not designed as an enterprise, always on, 24/7 with a VPN connection. It just doesn't work that way. I've had several customers tell me that they started out with a USB modem because it was quote-unquote free, but it died and it wouldn't work, and so forth and so on. So they ended up going back to Cradlepoint because they wanted something that was a little more robust. Another piece is, obviously, USB modems can be misplaced or stolen. USB modems also don't have very good antennas in them. If you look at the Cradlepoint, we have some really nice antennas. I wouldn't say they're the sexiest things out there, but they do work from 600 megahertz all the way up to 3.5 to 5 gigahertz range, and they support it very well. There's times when your cell phone might not have a signal, but the Cradlepoint's sitting there humming away with 5 bars of signal. Now, the other question is, for the network, besides network perimeter protection, do we offer payload inspection for detection of malware? We're looking into that. We will be partnering with other companies that do that. I don't believe we'll be doing our own type of payload inspection for malware, but we do have that as a service being offered by Trend Micro and a few others. And the question is, what's the difference between fixed 5G and full 5G? Fixed 5G is the fixed wireless, which we talked about. Full involves the mobility side of things as well. So today's operators are going to be deploying a fixed type environment day one as more of an enterprise or consumer play, depending on how they do it. Sort of like a cable modem replacement using fixed wireless, being able to provide that last mile type connection service at very high bandwidth. Full 5G is being able to have a 5G modem in a tablet or in a cell phone, and that's going to be coming as well. The standards for that will probably be standardized and ratified by the end of this summer, and we'll take it from there.
So I did want to mention, and I want to give everybody a chance to answer or to type in any more questions if you have them. I wanted to point out that in the attachments tab, we did provide a link to our brand new Pathway to 5G webpage, where you can kind of keep up with some of the recent stories out there, some of the stuff that we're putting out there, and just trying to stay informed about this ongoing pathway to 5G. So I wanted to point that out. Again, if you have any more questions, feel free to enter them, and if not, we might get everyone out of here a little early today.
One thing I do want to bring up, Cradlepoint announced a couple of weeks ago that we were offering a consulting service to give companies the ability to have somebody like myself or some of the others here come in and talk about use cases and go more in depth and have more of a workshop that says, all right, let's talk to you, Mr. CIO or CTO, and say, here's what 5G can do for you. What are you not able to deliver today that you might, your business unit owners might want to deliver in the future? Because what we're seeing is, even though 5G is being rolled out at the end of this year for some operators and over the next course of a couple years, people making buying decisions today for technology need to take in account what 5G will do for them and to make those decisions. Because in the next 5 years, there will be 5G out there. There will have this ability to have low latency. There will be high-speed bandwidth. So we had one customer that basically said, I'm going to deploy 2 Cradlepoint routers and get away from my wired connections. I'm going to use VRRP. It's going to replace my existing infrastructure. And I know that in a couple years, when some of my stores might have the ability to have a 5G type connection, I want to be able to put a high-def video unit in there so my HR department doesn't have to travel to do hiring seminars and do a bunch of hiring things out in the future. So they want to be able to do hiring and remote hiring using a high-def video conference over 5G, and that's they said, I'm going to be prepared. I have a good, solid connection with a couple of 2200s. I know it's going to support gigabit Ethernet at least, and so I'll be able to support things with very low latency as it comes out. And they made that decision here this summer. So.
All right. So I got a couple of admin questions that came in. One, I will attach the slide deck as soon as the presentation is over. Appreciate your patience with that. And then also, someone asked about if there's going to be an on-demand version of this webinar, and that's one of the great things about the BrightTALK tool is within about 5 or 10 minutes of this webinar being over, it will be available as an on-demand version with the same link that you used to arrive at today's webinar. So that will live on as an on-demand webinar if you want to listen again or if you want to share it with one of your colleagues. So I think with that, I think we're going to be able to end just a couple minutes early here. Give everyone 5 or 10 minutes back in your day. So I appreciate everyone being here. I appreciate Roger with the insights. And if we didn't get to your question, we will we will contact you. If there's someone that enters a question in here right at the last second, we will contact you and make sure that we answer that question for you. So with that, I just wanted to say thanks again and have a great day.
Thank you all. Appreciate your participation.